Welcome to the Hay Kings podcast, brought to you by Krone, dedicated to hay and forage producers. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Dave Spengler. Dave is the VP of Research and Laboratory Services for Agri King. And Dave's been working in the livestock nutrition world for 36 years. He's from Fulton, Illinois. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, John. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with some basics on hay preservatives and silage inoculants. Give us the 101 class.
Okay, well, if we're talking about silage inoculants, kind of the base for a silage inoculant, again, you'd be inoculating that forage, that whether it be an alfalfa hay, a grass haylage, a corn silage, etc., with a microbe, typically a lactic acid producing microbe. So inoculants by definition would be inoculating that forage with a lactic acid producing bacteria that would then help promote and direct the ensiling process, the fermentation process, via the production of lactic acid. And some inoculants also are heterofermenters, and again, that's maybe 102 or 201 or whatever that class, that would not only make lactic acid, but also some acetic acid, etc. So inoculant would be, again, the lactic acid bacteria. Some additives or treatments would also include items like enzymes or maybe some kind of antimicrobial to suppress the growth of undesired microorganisms like mold or yeast, things of that nature, that can decay or direct the fermentation the wrong way, eat up nutrients, if you will, that you want to get into the animal.
If those molds or yeasts are growing in there, they are performing a couple of functions, right? They are eating the product that you're trying to produce and at the same time causing it to decay.
Yeah, they're reducing the nutritive value of it.
Right.
In doing so, they're probably making end products like maybe ethanol or acetic acid, but also maybe in today's world, most importantly, they're making carbon dioxide, and which is a greenhouse gas, as we all know, and that reduces not only the overall energy but also the dry matter, the retained dry matter of that forage, and it cause shrink. So if you put up X number of tons on day one, by day 30 or 90, the reduction of gases that are formed, that's the reduction of that dry matter. Now you have less feed to put in front of your animals.
Okay, now let's go over to the preservative side. What are the preservatives that are available on the market?
So if we're talking about hay, again, on hay, as a preservative, there are anything from an antimicrobial, something like a organic acid, for example. There are propionic acid or maybe a buffered propionic acid. Those are maybe some of your common antimicrobial but preservatives. And then there's also maybe some additives, treatments that are, some are microbial based, some are enzyme based, some are a combination of many, many things. For example, some of the product that we formulate is a blend of antimicrobials, so antifungal agents, antioxidants, and then enzymes and some bacteria. The reason that is because the production of hay is kind of a balancing act, right? We want to dry the hay to a moisture in the field, right, that reduces the deterioration of that hay, right? So if it's too wet, we know that it can, or if it's too tough, we can have molding and we can have, respiration, which causes shrink or dry matter loss of that hay. But at the same time, we want to keep enough moisture in that hay that it maintains its, if it's alfalfa, you want to maintain its leaves, et cetera, and it maintains its nutritive value at a higher consistency. And again, as a nutrition company, that's all of us, I think, whether that hay is ultimately going to beef cows, dairy cows, or horses, etc., we want the nutritive value to go into the animal. Again, there's the balancing act of preserving the hay and not letting it get too dry. If it gets too dry, then we have leaf shatter, etc., and we leave a lot of that nutritive value in the field.
Oh,
and
boy.
We don't want to have that.
The hours that I've spent baling, now I'm on the West Coast, so we make alfalfa in the middle of the night often. Boy, the hours that we've spent doing that, trying to retain the nutrient value in the leaves. It's
right, by having to
a
do
large
come
part
back
of the
on,
game.
Correct?
Yeah, exactly. That's a big part of the game here. That's often the difference between nice hay and a bale of sticks, essentially.
Right. And we know if the bale if it's too wet, that can lead to microbial activity, right? Mm-hmm. That's where the molds can activate, and that's many times we want to get that moisture below. We know I'm a microbiologist, so we want to get the moisture below 15%. That really impedes the ability of molds to grow because they don't have enough free water, or what they call water activity, to activate and grow. So when I say activate, many times they're not actually growing in the field, but they're in a spore form. Mm-hmm. And think of a spore as a seed. Mm-hmm. And if there's enough free water activity, that spore can germinate and begin to grow. And we don't want to have that. And maybe even more importantly, we all know that hay sweats. Mm-hmm. And the reason we're getting that moisture low is because once the relative humidity during the sweating process of the hay, the relative humidity within that bale can rise.
Yeah.
And we know that molds and other microbes will activate, germinate, if you will, at relative humidities that go above 55%. So that's not 55% moisture, but that's 55% relative humidity within that bale. Now, We all know that we want our bales to sweat out that moisture, but during that process, that relative humidity within the bale increases. So even though that dry hay, it's it's sweating, and that relative humidity goes up. So that's where trouble can occur.
You're probably the perfect person to ask this. Okay, I've always wondered why that kind of maybe 12 to 15%, but you gave 15% there, and that kind of depends on where you're at. Why is that the critical threshold? Why sometimes and of course there's whole discussions on moisture meters too and measuring techniques, but why under similar conditions would you get mold at 18% but not at 15%?
That's a great question, because free water activity, being just like you and I, they need a certain amount of water to activate and to survive. And if they're in the spore state, they need a water activity of at least 15% to activate and grow. And so at 18%, they're above that magical threshold. Yep. And if they're below that 15%, then they're below that magical threshold. Even though there's some moisture there, it's not enough to really activate them. I always equate this or relay this. Here, again, we live close to the Mississippi River in the Midwest, and that's a thoroughfare for barge traffic going with corn and soybeans. Many of the local people, and I think people that transport or dry corn, especially do here in the Midwest, they completely understand that they will get docked. They'll get, for corn that's greater than 15% moisture, they have to dry it down to 15% moisture or less. Otherwise, they'll get penalized, right? Financially penalized. And the reason being is, again, people buying the corn, the elevators that then put it on these barges, they know that they have to dry it before they move it. Otherwise, it has the ability to become microbial active, or the mold can occur, right? And they can get heating on the barge, they can get heating in the silos, et cetera, or in their bins. And so locally, people really understand about getting, in this case, hay down to that 15%, and then it would stop microbial activity. Unfortunately, within the bale, even though it's 15%, And if earlier you talked about 18%, 18, 19, 20%, that's all well and good because you keep more of the nutrient value, you keep more of the leaves, if it's alfalfa, et cetera, and it's more palatable and all these things to the animal, more nutritive value. But unfortunately, that relative humidity, the higher the moisture within the stem, the more that relative humidity can go, can rise, as the bale sweats. And that's when it can become microbially active, and that's when you can get the caramelization, the potential heating, the matting, the mustiness of that bale, and that's what we want to avoid, right?
Oh, you just said so many things. Let's take a break there, and we'll get a word from our sponsor.
Get big and get better with special financing from Krone. Now you can get 0.9% interest for 60 months on Krone Big Pack Square Balers. That's years of savings at less than 1% interest. Plus, get 2 free pallets of Krone Excellent twine with every Krone Big Pack. Get the bale size, density, and reliability that comes with every Krone Big Pack Large Square Baler. Go big, go Krone. Special financing ends November 30th. See your Krone dealer today.
Let's come back to this stem moisture, matting, and heating. I'm just thinking about what actually causes the heating and that caramelization or that tobacco. I'm going to write this down to make sure that we get all of this.
Again, those are all either plant respiration and or microbial respiration, right? So the plant's sweating initially. It's sweating out its moisture through respiration. We want to limit that as much as possible. Again, going back to some of the ingredients that we formulate in our Silo King specific for hay, is we formulate with very specific food grade antioxidants and then also antifungal agents. But those antioxidants help prevent that heating process. Again, antioxidants scavenge those free radicals associated with the respiration process. They can cause the caramelization, ultimately cause heating, microbial growth like mold, etc. And if you can stop that microbial and plant respiration by the production, we all have heard about antioxidants, and they're good for us, but they're also good in this scenario is they can hinder or inhibit respiration. Respiration is what causes that increase from, respiration is the burning up of sugars to produce end products that will ultimately be gases like carbon dioxide and heat. And again, that's the burning up of these sugars, the respiration process.
And that's the plant continuing to try to live.
Yeah, it's going through its last gasp
right.
to stick around. And in doing so, it's respiring, but also if the relative humidity goes up high enough, you have the opportunity for any kind of naturally occurring mold or yeast, et cetera, that's on the plant, which there is.
There always is, right?
They can also start to respire. Yes, they're always there.
No matter where you're at.
Unfortunately,
every
yes.
plant, every plant in the world is infected with mold and yeast. Now,
yeah, they're laying in wait. We say that they're sitting there just waiting, smoking cigarettes, waiting for opportunity. So,
gotcha. Now that heating process, is that I've done some medium scale composting, and we know that when we get the right populations of bacteria, we're going to talk about the aerobic environment that you want for composting. Those bacteria eat a lot of stuff really fast and use that energy to multiply. And in that process, they're releasing heat, just like a human would getting hot and sweaty exercising. And that'll actually push temperatures in compost piles, you probably know exactly 150, 160 degrees. And under those conditions, you get rapid decomposition. That's exactly what we're trying to avoid in the hay world, right?
You're trying to, yes. We're not in the business in the nutrition business of making a compost heap. That's completely different. So,
yep. But
understanding a compost heap is critical in this case. That we know the drivers of a compost heap are typically bacillus organisms, but you said something very important: aerobic bacteria, aerobic microbes.
Yep.
That's why we turn compost heaps. We
aerate them.
We reinvigorate them with oxygen or air.
Yep.
By turning them, and those aerobic, oxygen-loving microorganisms. Key example is bacillus organisms. Again, that's also a spore former, but it's very, very, very active. The thing that bacillus brings to the table, it's a quote-unquote decay organism, a decomposition organism. It creates a lot of enzymes. Those enzymes will help break down those complex carbohydrates, fibers, etc., that are in the compost. The end result, as it's breaking those down, it's also respiring. Again, being an aerobic organism, it's respiring, and that one of the end products of respiration is heat, and that's why it'll drive that temperature up to 150, 160 degrees, etc. Mm-hmm. And that until it's stable. Now, eventually, a compost heap burns itself out, doesn't it?
Yes.
But the organic matter is still there, but it's broken down. It breaks that down. It uses those nutrients, those sugars, those fibers that are building blocks of fibers or even sugars.
Yep.
It uses those as an energy source to drive up the respiration or drive up the heat via respiration. And eventually, it sterilizes itself out, right? Eventually, it's no longer steaming and it's quote-unquote burn itself out. Now it's stabilized, and now you can utilize that.
Yeah, it runs out of sugar, basically.
Yes. It runs out of the fuel, so it ends up burning itself out, running in, just like a forest fire. Eventually, if there's no more kindling, there's no more wood, if there's no more underbrush, that really easily, burnable substrate, it burns itself out.
So what we're doing here is we're contrasting the composting process, which is in the presence of water, in the presence of oxygen, that promotes a particular bacteria population to go bonkers, right? The first time I saw a compost pile was at Washington State University. They were composting animal mortalities, and they were going from a dead cow to maybe finding a tooth here or there in 2 weeks. So, I mean, just that process is amazing.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It's so amazing. But we're contrasting against what's going on in hay, and maybe at some of our higher moisture scenarios here. I'm thinking those borderline scenarios for dry hay in the high teens and low 20s. We actually get some of these things happening.
Correct. And that's what we want to avoid, and that's what scares everyone.
Right? That's what causes
we
the
sit
heating.
here and talk about pushing the moisture up to keep more of the nutritive value, get in the field a little bit faster, so you're not getting maybe the bleaching of the hay. You're maintaining maybe a relative feed value, which that's how hay is traded, right? On the higher relative feed values or other RFQ, RFE, digestibility, that's how it's traded, and that's the worth of that hay, whether it's to a dairy or if you're exporting it, et cetera. All those, and also, you want to make it maybe that so if it's not bleaching out, you're keeping that greener hay, but now there comes that balancing act that you probably have to use some kind of a treatment to maintain the color, the nutritive value, without pushing it over the edge for it to become a compost heap. Because we've all seen the disasters of fires, right? And so that's what scares everyone, and that's us included. We want to be able to put the right ingredients in the right ratios to eliminate that possibility, right? So that's where the antioxidants, mold and yeast inhibitors, those ingredients are suppressing molds, and maybe some of these compost type bacteria from taking hold, and so it's suppressing their ability to heat, and at the same time, we're also treating that hay with some specific fiber digesting enzymes, which end up giving us more surface area by breaking up some of those fibers to give us more surface area on a microscopic scale, to give us more surface area for that hay to cure at a faster rate, for that moisture to get out of that hay. Again, stem moisture can be released, and even though that relative humidity is increasing, the antioxidant, mold and yeast inhibitors are suppressing the ability for those microbes and even the plant itself to respire, now you're releasing moisture without having that respiration burn up the sugars, contribute to shrink, etc. So it's again that balancing act.
Earlier, you talked about stem versus leaf moisture. We talk about this on the podcast because it is one of those fundamental concepts that somebody new to the hay industry almost always has to learn the hard way.
Yeah.
So
stem moisture is the killer.
Yeah. Take me through your lesson on stem versus leaf moisture.
Well, yes, exactly. So leaves where all the nutrients, the bulk of the nutrients, not all of it, but the bulk of the nutrients are in the leaves, right? And so that's where the high levels of vitamins, trace minerals, the very digestible sugars and proteins are all there. And that's what we want. That's where all the nutritional value is. But the stem, that's a scaffolding. And it's woven on an alfalfa, it's woven, but it's even tighter bundle within the grass. So that stem moisture, that's where you have to be critical. Alfalfa is a lot more porous, and the stem moisture can come out in relative terms a lot more easily than it can in the grass. Grass is a tighter wrapped bundle, and again, so it could be maybe a 13 or 14% overall moisture, but that stem moisture, if that stem moisture is 13 or 14%, that's fine as long as you're treating it and allowing that stem moisture to get out, right? Because if the stem moisture doesn't get out, or if you don't have maybe some kind of a air passage over your bales, et cetera, once that moisture comes out, you want to get it away from the bale, right?
I just had a light bulb. That moisture trapped within the tubular structure of the stem creates localized areas where the moisture content is over 15%.
Yeah, 100%. Exactly. Not 100% moisture, but 100% you're correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that localized higher moisture, relative humidity that can cause the microbial activity, right?
Yeah.
Or even the plant respiration. And once that, right, we have all seen that, it was just a hot spot. A hot spot can burn down a whole stack or a whole barn, right? One bale that's not, unfortunately, we've had that maybe the treatment wasn't applied to one or two bales, and they were put within a big stack, and that whole stack can go up, right? Because we were pushing, and it was all the other hay was just doing fine, but you had that one hot bale that wasn't treated, and now it got out of control.
Yep. You said something, and I know on the West Coast it's drier, generally speaking.
Yes.
Lower humidity. We don't necessarily have to just stuff hay in a barn to get it off of the field. We're going to get to some of my stories here in a second, but I try not to sell hay the first 2 weeks after I make it. Even if I have customers lining up to buy the hay, the answer is no, because I want that hay to go through the sweat process in my controlled conditions, because I don't want my customer to take it home and stuff it in the back corner of a barn without any air circulation, and because it's going to cause problems. When I'm doing a good job making hay, I'm pushing the boundaries, right? We're talking about this fine line around 15%, and you want to get as close to that without going over, right?
Right.
And when I'm doing a good job, I'm riding that line. That's what makes really nice, high quality hay, is riding that line. Also,
100%.
Also making money, right?
Well,
not letting the hay bleach in the field.
The world turns on that, doesn't it?
So. Oh yeah, I mean, not letting hay bleach in the field adds value to the hay. Not letting the leaves fall off adds value to the hay. There's financial implications to doing a really good job, of course. And when you're doing that really good job, you need to let that hay breathe. So my methodology is to put it in the stack, cover it, and now, of course, this is West Coast methodologies. We're going to throw a tarp over it, maybe even some side tarps, but we're going to leave the ends open to allow it to breathe. Those final elements of respiration. I'm learning your vocabulary here, to allow those last breaths of life in that plant to go away and to allow some of that moisture to be drawn out of the stack. Am I thinking about this right?
Yeah, you're 100%. You're thinking it correctly. Yes, the interior, that stem moisture. That's where the interior of a stack, just like the core of anything, right? You got to get that moisture out of that bale, and then it's stable, right? So you're doing exactly the right thing, allowing that hay to go through its sweat. So it's still going to go through a sweat, whether we're treated or not. With our product, any of the product, it's going to go through a sweat. We all have to understand this. It's going to go through a sweat. We just want that sweat to be subdued, meaning that it doesn't get out of control. It doesn't get, the respiration doesn't get going so much that you get the heating process. You want to subdue that, so now that any kind of respiration heat that does occur is easily dissipated, especially when you have some of the air movement going through, like you're doing. You're keeping the ends open when it's tarped, et cetera. Or here in the Midwest, they may put it in a barn, and then they keep the doors open, or they may put a fan on it.
Oh, yeah.
Our humidity here is higher than yours there. So that when we started using this product on the West Coast, the first thing we did for the first 2 years, we got a lay of the land, meaning that you make hay completely differently. Even though it's the same end product, you make it differently because your environmental conditions are different, right? So we had the first 2 years, we were on a fact-finding mission to make sure that we're going to meet what you expect, right? And in the Midwest and the East Coast, they may be great if they can get down to 20% moisture, right, before they start baling it.
Right.
Because the rain, it's inevitably coming. You may get you may get a couple of days for field drying, and then you better put it up because there's clouds on the horizon. And you run into the same thing there.
It does happen,
You have a relatively lower humidity, so you have the ability to draw more moisture. Our relative humidity is much higher at most times. And so we kind of cut our teeth for 40 years on that.
Let's take a break there and we'll get a word from our sponsor.
What's the big deal? Right now, get 0.9% interest on Krone Big M mower conditioners and Krone Big X forage harvesters with 36-month terms on Big X and 60 months on Big M. That equates to years of savings on the Krone equipment you need. Plus, get extended warranties on both the Big M and Big X. 3 years or 2,400 hours. Big performance, big throughput, big comfort. Go big, go Krone. Special financing ends November 30th. See your Krone dealer today.
That just means that there's a place in the atmosphere for the water in the haystack to go. And I mean, I live in a world where sometimes we get single digits on relative humidity. It's not all it's cracked up to be. Because then everything gets too dry, and that's how you make bales of sticks without any leaves on them.
Yes, again, that's one of the when we started asking questions of producers and exporters, what are some of your problematic things?
Yep.
And they said, a lot of times we want to be able to get that hay maybe off a day or two faster. Or we want to be able to put it up at a little bit higher moisture because then we retain more nutritive value, more leaves, etc. And so that was critical for them. And other people said maybe if we use a product like this or be able to get our hay off the field faster, we'll be able to get to the market first. Or we'll get the hay off, and now we'll have regrowth that'll happen for the next cutting better, right? Rather than having it lay on the field for many, many days. So, and again, that bleaching thing.
Let me tell a couple of my stories here. Full disclosure, Agri King came and put applicators on my balers and gave me some product to try. I think of myself as fairly progressive, but this is not new technology by any stretch. It's just a step to get to that next level. Before I start, the first thing that comes to my mind was setting up the equipment and starting with 1.5 pounds per ton. Does that number rings a bell in your mind? No doubt.
Yes.
How do you come up with that 1.5 pounds per ton?
It's all based on the ingredients. We want certain ingredients to go on at a certain level per ton of hay.
Okay.
And we kind of have a, let's say as the moisture goes up, now there's more of a quote unquote challenge on hay.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we are treating the dry matter, but the moisture in hay is your nemesis.
Yes.
Right? So the higher the moisture, the more product. So typically the application rates are somewhere between 1 pound and 2 pounds per ton.
Gotcha.
And so that 1.5, probably within the range of moistures that you were baling this hay, was probably spot on.
Gotcha. So we started on first cutting alfalfa. Usually in our neck of the woods, we're baling first cutting in the middle of the afternoon because the ground is wet, but the air is dry. And I know that that's like completely backwards to the Midwest, or at least maybe the ground is wet and the air is wet. But for us, we get some drying, right? This year, it was particularly dry, and from the 3rd of June until the 26th of October, we didn't have more than 1/10 of an inch of rain at any one time. So it was exceptionally dry. That first week in June, when I'm in South Canada, so we start pretty late. That first week in June, we had excellent harvest weather. I was riding the learning curve on a new set of conditioners too. We ended up getting an excellent dry down on the stems, but also the leaves were too dry. So we came in on, I'm going to say a Wednesday night. I think it was a Wednesday night. And the stem moisture was still just the tiniest little bit too high. Where I had flipped the windrows, the bottoms weren't quite there yet. We came back the next day, and it was all crispy critters, super dry, very, very, very dry, sub 8 or 9% moisture. Relative humidities in the low 20s, temperatures in the upper 80s. It was excellent drying conditions. And then we just wait for the dew to come in. And that time of year, dew's attainable. When we get to second cutting in the middle of July, we'll tell that story here in a second. It's not as attainable. We started at about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. I had my crew there. We had a couple of rakes and a big baler and a 3-tie Freeman baler. With the big bales, of course, there's less ability to move water in the big bales, so you want to bale those a little drier. We started the big baler with the preservative loaded but not on. Started the big baler just as the temperature dropped. Most hay producers, you felt in the evening or maybe in the afternoon, where you get a noticeable temperature change in a few seconds. That's telling you that there's something going on with the moisture in the air. So we started the big baler, and then we waited another 20 minutes watching the weather station and feeling the hay, and you can kind of feel that hay just come back to life a little bit, where it doesn't break apart at the first touch. So then we started the little baler, and we have moisture meters on the little baler. We have moisture meters on the big baler. We have, shout out to Delmhurst. If you guys want to do a podcast, I'd love to talk to you guys too, because I use a Delmhurst analog moisture meter. So we were watching the moisture very, very carefully. We were doubling the windrows ahead of the balers and, I don't know, pushing 30 tons of hay an hour. As the dew came in, we turned the preservative on the big baler and then continued to watch the moisture very, very carefully. We kept baling until we hit about 16%. And this is dew moisture, not stem moisture. Remembering that it was all super dry during the day, where you picked it up, and we've all done the old twist test. I'm talking about the kind of hay that you don't even get a twist. It just, a bundle the size of your wrist just shattered. So super, super dry hay, rehydrated with the dew. We took the moisture up to about 16%, and that lasted us until close to midnight. So we got a good 4 hours worth of baling in there. And by then the crew was tired, and I didn't want to make mistakes in the dark and that kind of stuff. So we shut it down. That was basically perfect conditions for the small baler. And we never got to the point where I felt it was necessary to turn the preservative on the small baler. But the big baler, that 16% would be entirely too high for our conditions. I kind of like to see 11, 12, maybe 13 on our big baler. Of course, these aren't hard and fast numbers, but it worked wonderfully. We were able to get 120, 4 hours, 30 tons an hour. Yeah, we were north of 100 tons of hay that night. We had another 40 or 50, 60 tons somewhere that we did the next morning as the dew was burning off. And it was wonderful. It worked so well. Because it allowed me to run both balers at the same time, similar moisture conditions, it just operationally it worked. Had I not had the preservative on the big baler, I would have had to shut the big baler down much sooner. So what I'm talking about working really well was giving me another hour or two running the big baler that night. And then the next day, we were able to start the big baler and the small baler at the same time with the preservative on. And I probably could have started the little baler a little sooner, especially if I'd have turned the preservative on. But we only had, 2 hours worth of baling to do. So in that situation, it wasn't worth it to run the preservative. The product turned out amazing. The leaf retention that we got in the big bales and the little bales was very comparable. I loved it. Now, we're going to jump ahead to second cutting, and then we can talk through some of the things that I just discussed. Oh, and for that first cutting, we field stacked it, we top tarped it, and I just forgot about it for a week outside sweating. Just let that stack do its thing and breathe. For the second cutting, it was a completely different scenario. There was no dew coming in at night. We were baling with the humidity coming up in the morning, just enough to keep the leaves on the stems, barely. But that humidity we'd start baling 55 or 60% humidity, somewhere in there. But it was going up to 17% humidity. And again, we got the hay super dry, and then trying to rehydrate it. When the humidity was hitting 75%, we were getting 17s, 18s, and 19s on our moisture meters. There's no perfect moisture meter. The only perfectly accurate test is like a microwave test or kiln drying. So take all these numbers with a grain of salt. But the humidity started out too dry, maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. By 4 o'clock in the morning, we were in the baling range. By 6 o'clock, it was too wet to go without preservative. And then coming down as the sun came up, the moisture comes down as the sun comes up, we had about another hour and a half of good moisture conditions. And in that scenario, we turned on the preservative and we just kept baling. And that got me another hour with 2 balers, and it got the work done in a timely fashion. So where I'm finding that value is in just keeping both balers going consistently and then turning the preservative on and off as my conditions change. And remember that we're going from way too dry to a little too wet for regular baling and then too dry again. And the only train wreck that I had is when I baled a set of needles on my baler, because we'd been up at 2 and 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning for a week straight, and we were all smoked. Just wasn't paying attention. Strictly my fault. And I had to go borrow a cousin's baler, and the only wet hay that I baled that molded on me that customers complained was the hay that I baled with my cousin's baler, not because the baler was bad, but because I wasn't making good management decisions and didn't have the tools that I needed. How's that for a story?
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah.
There is a learning curve with this too. I should say on that first cutting hay, we did have some wet spots in those bales. In the big bales, not in the little bales. We generally bale the outside edges with the big baler because there's more variability in quality. Weeds come in from the outside of the field. They don't start in the center, those kind of thought processes. And likely we had a couple of corners that didn't get raked perfectly, or because it was along the tree line, the bottoms didn't dry quite right. So we had some spots at 22% moisture. They were green enough in the big bales that as we were pulling that stack apart, you could look at the bales and see them. We pulled those bales apart. They'd been treated with the preservative. They were dusty. and kind of that moldy dust. It hadn't turned color. It hadn't heated. I think in the absence of a preservative, I'd have had a brown streak. Certainly the bale above, maybe the bale below, maybe 2 bales above. I mean, that could have caused a problem, but it didn't. And I thought that, keep in mind, very, very dry air conditions, single row of big bales. So there was about as much opportunity for that stack to breathe as I could have provided. So favorable conditions all the way around for that hay storage to not have a train wreck. I would not advise baling that high. Don't do it. That's going, even if you get away with it like I did, that's going to be a bad situation. Did I say anything there that piqued your interest?
Yeah, very much so. Typically you're always baling with the moisture, the dew coming back on the hay. Have you ever tried, as instead of when the hay's coming back up in moisture, have you ever tried to use the additive, the preservative, as the hay's coming down in moisture?
Yes. I mean, the reality is I was dealing with a window to bale hay from 4 a.m. to 7:30 a.m., and that was it. So we have to hit the moisture coming in when the dew gets a little too heavy, and then when the moisture's going back out. That's a very, very common occurrence for us. And
yes,
that was an unusually dry summer. So we were at 70% of our normal precipitation in a place that only gets 1.5 inches or 2 inches June, July, and August. That's very, very normal for us. And we just have to bale dew coming in, dew going out. We do get shut down in the middle of the night sometimes. That was just a very unique condition where we had an especially narrow window. But it's very often that we'll start baling 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, go to midnight or 1 when the dew gets too heavy, go sleep for a couple hours, and then bale in the morning again as the dew's burning off.
So there's 2 things that, in my mind at least, is going on there. As the hay moisture is coming down, then you're dealing with stem moisture yet, right?
Oh, right.
But when the hay's when it's coming back on, you're dealing with dew moisture. Stem moisture and dew moisture are way 2 different things, because the moisture is already on the outside of the stem when you're talking about dew moisture, and that's easier to breathe out. It can discolor. It can germinate,
Yep.
Germinate spores, etc. But it's a lot shorter time period typically for it to breathe or cure out in that hay stem moisture compared to, dew moisture, compared to stem moisture. Stem moisture, that can take, a much longer time frame for it, because that internal moisture within the stem has to first come out and become quote unquote dew moisture, and then it has to evacuate. So that's, both of those scenarios are they're completely different, as you've just stated.
Oh yeah.
So
we do distinguish between the dew coming on. That makes better hay, but the dew coming off is another opportunity we have on the backside. And what I heard you say is that dew has actually had sufficient time to soak into the stem, where it turns into a problem again.
Yeah, a really dry stem, as you see, right? It can be kind of spongy, where it can soak back up that moisture, right? That dew. Again, those are good haymaking is just as much of an art as it is a science, right? And I think that a really good hay producer is just as much an artist as he is a scientist and a farmer. So,
and an insomniac, right?
Well, thank God for caffeine.
Oh boy. Oh, I got some feedback. This is the human side of things. I got some feedback from my wife that I was getting a little grouchy after a week of working those hours. Let's take a break there and we'll get a word from our sponsor.
What's up, Hay Kings? You have a lot of choices when it comes to sourcing your equipment parts, but have you tried Messick's? We have $20 million in equipment parts on our shelves, and we pick up from C&H Parts Depots daily. All this inventory is available with same-day shipping with no upcharges or expediting fees. Messick's.com has exclusive features like transparent pricing, photos of parts, fit verification, alternative part options, and an obsolete part search tool alongside the manufacturer's drawing so you're not guessing at what you need. We cover all the top brands, including New Holland, Case Case IH, Kubota, Krone, and Peckway, and more, all from our website. Our online tools are backed by 60-plus parts professionals who are just a call away, ready to find even the most obscure parts. So whether you're a seasoned farmer or a weekend enthusiast, think Messick's for a convenient and professional part shopping experience. Visit us at Messick's.com or call our parts hotline at 877-260-3528.
Messick's, a helping hand with your land.
Do preservatives, like your Agri King product, increase the nutritional quality or help keep it the same or just prevent degradation?
That's a great question. It's kind of a loaded question, but I think 90% of the time it maintains nutritional value. If they're doing it right, you're maintaining nutritional value. We're not alchemists, right? In the fact, but if you do, the product does have enzymes. If there's the ability to reduce the ADF and NDF fiber by the use of cellulosic enzymes, then it will reduce the ADF and NDF. And through a laboratory analysis, how are relative feed value calculated by ADF and NDF? So if those are slightly lower, then your relative feed value will go up. Well, overall, the nutritional value, I think you're maintaining the nutritional value. The worst thing that can happen is you can lose nutritional value. We want to at least maintain. If it, through a laboratory analysis, if it goes up slightly, it's not going to go up much, but if it can go up slightly, that's great. You just don't want it to the bottom to fall out. Let's say you have 150 relative feed value, and now you get caramelization, et cetera, from respiration and heating, and now you're at 80 or 90 relative feed value. Now you've lost a tremendous amount of money for that hay, and because the nutritional value is gone.
Are there any safety or handling concerns with this product?
Nope. No, there's not. It's unlike maybe organic acid, et cetera. Everything is food or feed grade and non-corrosive. Mm-hmm. There's applicators for it. They're dry applicators. Internally, it has a very low relative humidity itself, so it likes to stick to that bale inside of that bale. So there's absolutely no handling concerns whatsoever with this.
Yeah, and I liked 50-pound bag, pour it in the hopper, and go. That was very. I didn't necessarily like packing the bags up my big baler, but that's the way life works, right? Yeah, I found the product to be very nice to work with. How do I communicate to I'm going to pick on horse customers for a minute. How do I communicate to my horse customers that this preservative is different or safer, or, just how do we tell this story versus maybe a propionic acid?
Yeah, again, there's no corrosiveness to it. Everything's food or feed grade, and everything's generally recognized as safe. There's no DOT, Department of Transportation, problems with it. Again, the horse, we've had local zoos and zoos across the United States have treated their hay that goes to their pachyderms, their elephants, their whatever, their zebras for decades. And again, because it's a food grade, we've treated hay that goes to horses for, again, decades, and there's absolutely no problems with it whatsoever. Again, everything's food or feed grade.
That's a good story to tell, and that non-corrosive element too. I know that's a big deal when you start talking about equipment values and those kind of things.
Yeah. I didn't mean to even say it that way, but yeah, you like to keep the paint on your machinery.
Yep,
right? And
sure
the corrosive, there's no problems with this. You could sprinkle it on your cereal. You could sprinkle it on your lettuce and consume it yourself. And now your digestibility will go up. A lot of us don't need that digestibility to go up. But there's nothing in it that is harmful.
Haylage, wrapped round bales. And I've done a little bit of this. And sometimes, even when you've done a good job getting the hay wrapped, and we do it timely, we exclude that oxygen rapidly, we make sure that we patch any holes that we get in the plastic, and we keep up on that. Sometimes we still get some moldy looking or discoloration on the outside of the bales. Can you give me the highlights on what that is? Is it harmful, and does the color of the stuff matter? Yeah,
it's again another very good question, and it kind of The easy answer is it kind of depends. Typically on hay, we check a lot, or haylage, in this case, haylage, wrapped around bales that have been siled, baleage. That mold it's going to maybe hurt a little bit of palatability, but not tremendous amount. And then that mold has not made mycotoxins that are going to be negative to, milk production or things of that nature. We've tested thousands upon thousands of hay and haylage samples for mycotoxins, and they're just not there. Now, if it's a grain source, something that's corn or barley or oats, now the grain is what typically carries a grain-bearing substrate or crop is what carries the mycotoxins. So like a red mold, a reddish mold would be a fusarium type, because there was no grain involved. It's not going to create mycotoxins. It's going to be a spoilage mold. It's going to be, again, the moisture was highest at the interface between
the plastic and the hay.
Yeah, and that's where the most oxygen is. And just like you and I, mold requires oxygen for growth. If there's no oxygen, mold will not grow. That's where it's highest, and that's when you're going to see it. It's at that interface where now there's a little bit of oxygen.
Now, there's white colors that you'll see sometimes? You just covered red.
Yep. Yeah, so you'll see a lot of white color, and again, that's the root structure, or what they call mycelium. So it starts as white. And that could be an aspergillus, it could be a penicillium, it could be something called mucor, or even fusarium. And they start as white, and as the older they become, the more mature they become, then they sporulate, and it's actually the spores that give the color to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not until they make their quote-unquote seeds, the spores, that they really gather the color. Before that, they're just sending down the root structure, and that's where they're
harvesting nutrients and yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, that kind of demystifies that a little. I'm by no means a baleage expert, and we only do it, call it opportunistically, and if we have to. I have done enough to know that you put plastic on until your wallet hurts, and then you do a little bit more.
There's a lot of truth to that because you're trying to exclude that air.
Yeah.
You're trying to exclude that air.
Yep.
And the more wraps, the more exclusion of air. And again, we just talked about mold will not grow if
without oxygen.
If there's no oxygen. Yeah. So if you exclude that with the more and more wraps, again, until probably, unfortunately, it hurts your wallet.
Yep.
Then you have more of an oxygen barrier there.
Any last thoughts you want to leave me with?
For those of you that are maybe on the fence, we have a lot of people that were also on the fence and just put their toe in the water and try the product or try something like this, and see what it can do for you. Again, it's not the end all, the beat all, but it's a management tool. It has a place for various operations, whether it be a producer that's selling into the horse industry, a producer that's selling into the livestock industry, meaning dairy cows, beef animals, or even going to export. And it's been used in all those scenarios already. And it's been used in those scenarios for many, many years with great success. I'm
going to emphasize that there is a learning curve. And if you're new to the hay industry, do small bites, but not just in regards to preservative, but learning the difference between stem moisture and dew moisture, and then learn how to incorporate these management tools, and make sure that you know what your specific goals are. In my case, I just want to keep baling as that humidity changes or as that dew changes, and where I can get an extra hour or two of baling. That was really my goal. Now, maybe somebody in the Midwest or on the East Coast, you have different goals because you don't get the dry windows. As you're interacting with these tools, ask the questions, what is my goal? What do I need? Dave, it's been wonderful to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Again, we've been talking with Dave Spengler. Dave's the VP of Research and Laboratory Services for Agri King. This podcast is brought to you by Krone. For more information, visit krone-na.com. And if you want to interact more with Hay Kings, of course, there's the Hay Kings Facebook group. That's where it all started. And you can also visit hay-kings.com. A special thank you to Nick Palmieri at Palmieri Sound and Jessica Palmieri for doing our social media coordination.